It turns out that a lot of the cards they waited until the day of release to spoil were really good after all, so we're going to talk about it. Hello everyone, and welcome to FECast episode 80, where we go over more constructed cards from Cold Hunt and basically everything we can talk about in draft. I am your host, Sunyveil, and I am joined by my co-host, Stormblessed, who apparently got a card snuck into the set. This seems very unfair, and I'd like to have a word to the Direwolf designers about this decision. How's it going, Stormblessed?
You know, Sonny, sometimes you just have to be, you just gotta have an in with Direwolf, and then they put, invitational cards in the set for you, Sonny. I mean, if Direwolf likes you, that is, it's just a sign of who they like better.
I wonder if my card is already an Eternal, and it's just like, I don't know.
It's
What
Yeti
would the
Cookmaster.
card that be? Huh? Yeti Cookmaster? It was Yeti Cookmaster all along?
It was Yeti Cookmaster all
along. All right. Cold Hunt has dropped. We've been furiously drafting, trying to figure out the format. There were a lot of cards that we think are going to impact Constructed one way or another that we didn't know about until the set was dropped. And usually that happens for a few of the cards. They usually have a few surprises for us, but this time it just seems like so many of these cards are great Constructed cards.
I think this is pretty average as far as the number of cards. I actually think it's less than normal, because I think that one day extra that they delayed the set, they just... Although I guess that one day they also spoiled cards on the Discord, so ignore me. But yeah, I think there was regular amount. There's no crawls this time, as far as cards that are spoiled that are like, the best card that Eternals that are printed. But there's still a number of good cards, so we have to discuss them.
And I think something else that really messed with us is that there were some cards that got changed between when they were revealed as a community spoiler and when they're released. So that's a little weird.
There might be more, but there's only two we're going to discuss right now. And the first one is Spared Fate, which was the 3-cost Hailstorm that picks up one of your units and then kills it to non-flyers. But now it costs 4, so now that card is very much relegated to markets. If that, costing 1 more really hurts the card. Obviously in draft it's still completely absurd, but in constructed it's now definitely relegated to markets at best. The other card that was changed is Waystone Igniter. Waystone Igniter used to be a 1-cost 1/2 that had contract 2, it gets +2/+2, you play a 1/1 Wisp, or you kill a relic with even cost. Now it is a 1-cost 2/1. So it's more aggressive on turn 1, or if you're not contracting it, but overall it's probably weaker because making it in 3/4 is a really good stat line, especially on turn 1. 4/3 is a less good stat line because Torch exists. That being said, though, I think this is probably for the best, because I think other way it was a little bit powerful. Additionally, I think this way is better because it means that there might be more opportunities, or it's not as bad to play the Spiteling. A 2/1 and a 1/1 is very different than a 1/2 and a 1/1, right? Like a 2/1 and a 1/1 is a board presence, whereas a 1/2 and a 1/1 is much less of a board presence. So I like that it opens up the card to more options, makes it a little bit more dynamic of a card, but overall it's probably a little bit worse.
Yeah, it's weird how like a 3/4 is a better stat line than a 4/3, but a 1/2 isn't as good as a 2/1, and how it changes the card. There was also one more card changed, Unseen Marksman, right? We just didn't talk about it because it was a 3/2 before for 2, and now it's a 3/3 for 2, and 3/3s for 2 have seen a lot of play in Eternal's history, so maybe has a shot of seeing play in Argenport decks. This is the 2-cost Argenport common, I believe. All right, shall we get into cards that we did not know about, but now have seen and are trying to evaluate?
The first of these is the Tomes. We got power for the set. We only got 5 power. We got Praxis, Stonescar, Combray, Huru, and Felon factions for Tomes. Tomes they gain 1 each influence in the respective faction, and they are depleted on your first 3 turns of the game. So on turn 4 or later, they're undepleted. Expedition, you're going to play them because that's all that we got. In Throne, they're interesting options. They're cool design. They're probably less powerful than Paintings because you obviously want to be undepleted early, but they definitely have their place in different decks, control decks more so than aggro decks, obviously. So what do you think about Tomes?
I think Tomes are going to be phenomenal in Expedition, and in those games, like, they're going to be decided later on, whereas in Throne, I think the games are usually decided, or at least hinge upon early actions. So being depleted on the first 3 turns is a bigger drawback there. But I think these tomes are great. I haven't seen all of the powers that are legal in Expedition, but these seem like the types of cards that would really allow for multi-faction decks, like 3 or 4 faction decks.
The tomes also seem like they could play well with Inscribe, because if you're inscribing on turns 1 through 3, you're more likely to play your depleted power then, and then you're more likely to have a tome undepleted because you're inscribing earlier in the game. So I think that that's actually a good place to put this card designed for a dual power, because it plays well with Inscribe.
I'm just looking up the powers in Expedition.
We have seats and tomes, and we have seats and banners for the 5 factions that don't have tomes.
Okay. The fact that we have 2 different types of powers for each faction combination probably means that it will be opened up to a lot more ambitious power bases.
We always had 2.
Did we? Okay, maybe.
We had paintings and seats, and then banners and seats.
Yeah, but I feel like at some point we had vows or something in there, and it wasn't really good for getting up to high influence counts.
I will say that tomes are better in like 3 faction decks, like mid-range decks, because they're more likely to get to turn 4 or later to want it. And also, unlike vows, right, you get 2 influences, which is more relevant in a 3 faction deck doing things. Either way, though, Expedition, you're definitely playing them in Throne. They'll be situational for good deck building, and I think that's always a good thing.
Okay, let's talk about some of the non-power cards and some of the new cards. The first one is Hearth Smasher, which is a 4-cost double fire unit. It's a 4/4. When one of your units dies, deal 1 damage to the enemy player, and based on the wording, I'd assume it counts itself. And this one's pretty interesting. It's a pretty powerful effect. Now, the decks that sacrifice their units a lot don't have to have an actual way of killing their opponent. They can just have a unit that kills their opponent, like Hearth Smasher. I think this card might be good. It's really good at popping face ages. And these type of effects, they've done a lot of work in the history of competitive card games. What do you think, Stormblast?
I'm kind of leaning towards Wasteland Broker end of the scale. I think it's better than Wasteland Broker because it, impacts the board and, can actually kill your opponent. But at the same time, though, it's expensive, right, for a sacrifice deck. You're only playing a 4-drop in a sacrifice deck. I don't know. Obviously, it has some amount of goody goodness to it, and, it could end up being really powerful, but I'm a little skeptical on the card.
Yeah. One other thing that just occurred to me is there are a lot of sweepers in this format, and it's kind of sweeper insurance if you're going really wide. We'll see. It's like definitely borderline. The next card that caught my eye was Puffer Humbug. This is a 1-cost time unit. It's a 1/1 flying ambush. Contract 2, give Puffer Humbug +2 health. Not terribly exciting, but if we have a return of the Skies deck, I forget what that card is. That
Majestic Skies?
Yeah, Majestic Skies. That gives all of them +1/+1. This seems like not a bad one because it dodges sweepers a little better.
I don't have much thoughts about it. I never really cared for the Skies deck before. Don't really care for it now. I don't know. It's cute. I wish it was a Clockroach, though. I think it would be cool if it was a Clockroach non-insect.
They have to be really careful about how many Clockroaches they print.
I know. So that was Sunny's time card that I don't have much thoughts for. This time card is one that Sunny probably doesn't have much thoughts for. This is Field Medic. It's my ambush cards, and they got an ambush now, and I have an ambush. This is 3-time for a 2/3 Ambush Valor. Contract 3. Field Medic is invulnerable to damage this turn, and you gain life equal to the total number of units. Period. Not units you control, just total number of units in play. So if your opponent has 10 units, you play this, you gain 11 life. The contract's a little bit expensive. That being said, though, it's a pretty decent defensive option. I don't know why it has Valor of all keywords, though. That one confuses me.
Yeah, like the attacks don't mean much.
Like, if you're playing this card, you're probably not playing to attack with a 2/3 Valor on turn 4. So that being said, though, I think the card is a very decent anti-aggro option. And I really like fun, interesting ambush cards, and this is a fun, interesting ambush card. So I really like it.
Yeah, it seems really good against aggro for sure. I just, it doesn't have very much flexibility. That's all it's good against. It has ambush, so you might get in a few attacks if you're playing against decks that has a lot of slow removal or something. But, attacking with a Bold Adventurer that costs 3 is not going to threaten anyone too much. I guess it's also kind of good against sites, because ambush is good against sites, but yeah. I don't know. Well, it's definitely great against aggro. I'll say that.
Yeah.
Oh, you know what? Actually, one thought about it is time decks, don't, if you're playing a big time deck, you don't usually have very good ways of catching up if you're behind on board. So getting to gain health, if your opponent is really wide, could be just the piece of the puzzle that time decks are missing. We'll see.
I think incidental life gain is constantly underrated. Now, don't play cards just to gain life, but a card that incidentally says gain 3 life on it, like Fear Tracker. gains 3 life, deals 3 damage. It's really good. If Field Medic just was 3 cost, 2/3 ambush, it is invulnerable damage this turn, it would be probably somewhat close to playable, and then I think that giving it the life gain attached to it puts it over the top as far as playability goes. I don't know, it's not going to be the most busted card ever, but I think it is playable.
All right, another card that greeted me in my first draft that I had not seen before starting the draft was Expedition Gear, which is a 6-cost time relic, single time. Your units with battle skills have +1/+1. Your units without battle skills have +2/+2. Contract 6, play a 1/1 Explorer and a 1/3 Trail Runner with Charge. So I think the play pattern for this is a lot of the time you're going to play it on 6 and you're going to take the contract to immediately get a 3/3 and a 2/4 in play along with buffing your other units. This seems like a pretty good obelisk type effect to me. I think a lot of the time if you're playing a deck like this, it's going to have a lot of units that don't really have very many skills, so you'll get +2/+2 on a lot of your units. It's kind of expensive at 6, so I don't expect to see it in Throne. But for Expedition, it seems like they're definitely giving the tools to play with and against a go-wide deck.
It is cute that it makes rats 3/3s, because rats don't have battle skills.
Ooh, can't block doesn't count?
Nope.
I guess it's just stuff that you can fall short, right? I've never tried to fall short a can't block unit, I don't think.
You ever tried to fall short a rat before? A 1/1 for 0?
No, I don't think that has ever come up.
So speaking of cards that are go wide cards, we have Marisen's Legacy, 6 time for a spell, a slow spell. Play a 1/1 Scorpion Deadly, a 2/2 Locust with Flying, and a 3/3 Stand card with Overwhelm. So it is effectively playing each of the 3 cards off Marisen for the total cost of them, right? Because Scorpion is a 1/1 for 1 time, Locust is a 2/2 for 2 in time, and then Sandcrawl is a 3/3 for 3 in a time. So 1 + 2 + 3 = 6, time + time + time equals triple time. So really cute design. Obviously limited. It's a house. It's really good and limited at helping you catch up and get ahead, and just really good and limited. In constructed, the best application for it is obviously Volatility. It is a 6-cost spell that produces units and helps you catch up in a game. And I think that makes it potentially Volatility viable, or just Spells Matter viable, because really the problem with the Spells Matter, the 5-cost Spells Matter, is that the spells weren't impactful enough and were just overcosted versions of cheaper effects, right? Like a removal spell. Like I'm going to play 5 cost for a removal spell. I could pay 2 for a removal spell, right? There's very little good spells that also produce units, and this is a spell that produces units. That's something we haven't had very much of previously. So I think this has a shot.
I'm pretty skeptical about this card. In Magic, there was a 7-cost card that made a 1/1, 2/2, 3/3, and a 4/4. I don't think it ended up seeing any play. Granted, it didn't give flying to any of them, but it's just doesn't feel like the type of effect that will end up being very good, even though like the math checks out.
We will see, Sonny. We will see. I will make this card work. I will win all the tournaments with it, and then I will show you.
Well, okay. I mean, yeah, I do think like the volatility idea is interesting, but I think it's because of the Inscribe cards and not cards like this.
Yes. No, if this card had Inscribe, it'd obviously become absurd.
Yeah, and then I think it would be quite good.
I've played Bathe in Light. Bathe in Light's very fun to play with.
All right, the next card on our list is Argenport Noble. This is a 2-cost 3/2 double justice. Has lifesteal. So if you play it as a 2-drop, it's just a 3/2 with lifesteal, but it also has contract 3, silence an enemy unit or relic with cost 3 or less. This card seems pretty good if you're playing some sort of aggressive deck and lifesteal is relevant. On rate, it's like pretty solid. I don't know if there are any 3/2 lifesteals for 2 in Eternal, but it does a lot of things that you want to, and then having some flexibility in the late game, I think, helps a lot.
We definitely have 2 2s for 2 with lifesteal, and we have 2 3s for 2 with lifesteal. But I think this is our first 3/2 with lifesteal. This card is interesting because its effect would be stronger in Throne, where Throne is playing cheaper units more often than Expedition, right? But at the same time, though, it's also expensive for Throne. 2 + 3 to silence something is much different than 2 cost with ambush or 3 cost by itself with flying. So I'm not so sure about its place in Throne. Lifesteal is obviously a very powerful ability. But in Expedition, for sure, I think it definitely will see some play, especially because we don't have markets in Expedition, and this allows you to interact with relics, which is something that might be hard to do without markets. So I think Expedition, it's definitely going to see a bunch of play.
All right, the next one is a huge one. Orene Scepter, and this was a big bomb when I opened up my Discord and saw people chatting about this the day the set came out. 3-cost relic, triple justice, When you play a unit, it gets Aegis. If it already has Aegis, it gets +1/+1. Ultimate, pay 9, and the enemy player can never play spells again.
This card is hilarious. I don't exactly know how to evaluate this. It's not a very good top deck in a regular unit based deck because you have to be able to play units after it to get the buff or the Aegis. That being said, it has a very unique effect. Stopping your opponent from playing spells ever again could be very powerful. So something like, I don't know, TJS control maybe that could care about giving units Aegis and also can get to, 12/9 power right to activate its ability. That could be a place for it. It does get blocked by Phase Aegis, so stock up on that ability. This card's super unique. It's truly so difficult to evaluate how good it is in constructed or limited. Probably terrible in limited though.
Yeah, it's probably not good in limited. But I didn't think about it in a controlled mirror, but it seems like it would really shine there. I was thinking of it in like an aggro deck that plays the 3/3 that has Mastery 6, get an additional power. That deck has a few ways of being aggressive, but also building up large power amounts, and this might fit that strategy. One of the downsides is it's really bad in multiples. Well, I guess it's actually not that bad in multiples because you probably get Aegis then +1/+1. That's interesting. But anyway, like some sort of aggressive deck that has a reasonable shot of getting to the 9 power without working too hard seems like it could be a reasonable card in that. But control mirrors, that seems like where it would really shine because it protects your units from their removal spells and then also threatens to just win the game.
So Scourge of Frostum was commonly played in the past, and I think control decks would rather play a permanent effect off a relic. Now that would be really funny, Sonny, is Control Me where both players have activated Arene Scepter, and now we're just sitting there. I guess it's time to see who can draw their one merchant first or whatever.
Yeah, who can draw more units? That would be really funny.
Who can draw more Jotun Hurlers? Time to do the Jotun Hurler beatdown. Like waiting 17 turns to just draw a Jotun Hurler.
You don't even get anything off the snowball. That's the worst part.
Okay, so the next card is also very exciting. This is part of the cycle of legendary inscribed cards that cost 4 influence and have some sort of effect when you inscribe it. So this is Stormhalt Plating. It is 8 cost quad justice for a 6/8 relic weapon with your avatar can attack twice. But it also has inscribe. When you inscribe Stormhalt Plating, gain 2 armor. So it's like sort of the Sky King, except it has inscribe and it gains you armor, and it also can attack twice at the cost of only not having 8 attack. So yeah, this card's a lot better than sort of the Sky King, and is a lot better than Emerald Waystone. This card's very good. This card is very, very good.
Yeah, this card is very exciting for people who love to play with their relic weapons. I think that relic weapons time in Throne has come and gone, but if it's a strategy and expedition, this is probably going to be a big part of it because when you're recurring the relic weapons, it has that 2 extra armor each time. So that's a big deal. And then, of course, it's a depleted power, and then eventually it becomes a big weapon. Also, if you're just playing a control deck, like a power that gains 2 health and provides influence is probably pretty good.
I think something like Ixton Control, think like Lights Out Ace's deck from Worlds. It plays this, it can gain 2 health for its power, and then late game, it's a win con that's also a life game that helps you stabilize the early game. This card in a control deck means you have to play less true win cons because your power is a win con effectively.
Yeah, the more that I think about this card, the more it just seems quite good. Even though, like, it's an 8 cost quad justice card, but it does seem very good.
Compare this to, like, Con, which gives the top unit of your deck +1 attack. So, the next card, I almost feel like I'm contractually obligated to say it's my favorite card in the set, although it's not. This is Stormblast. I am Stormblessed to have this card in the set. It's 2 Primal for a fast spell that deals 4 damage to an enemy or sight played this turn, or negates an enemy's spell with cost 4 or less. So it's kind of like Dazzle in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it's Dazzle for small things and small spells, which a lot of the time is the more important part. I've only played this in limited so far, and it's been very good. The flexibility on this is just exceptional. It can't deal with an aggro deck that's beating you down and just playing units and like making it so that you can't hold up 2 power, like you're just not giving you the time to do that. But most other positions, it's either going to negate a spell or be able to deal with like a mid-sized unit. So this card has really impressed me so far.
The difference between this and Dazzle is that Dazzle can work on things that are in play currently. You don't have to technically hold the power the turn that thing is played, but Dazzle also doesn't kill things. This also doesn't plunder too, right? If this card had plunder or inscribe, I mean, then it would be like truly absurd. It's probably good that it doesn't. But it is really cool to see a card named Stormblast that is also not a terrible card. I would have been very sad if this was a terrible card. I'm sure Sunny would have loved it if this card was the worst card in the set, though.
Yes, it would reflect reality. All right, the next card is another one of the Inscribe quad of a single faction cards. This is Serpent Hive. This is a spell, 6 cost and quad primal. Has Inscribe, play 2 3/3 Sky Serpents with flying, and give up to 2 units flying this turn, which doesn't seem that important for this, but getting the 2 Sky Serpents is. When you inscribe Serpent Hive, deal 1 damage to an enemy player or site. So this one seems like one of the worst to play as a power, but the effect of getting 2 3/3 flyers is like universally good, right? That's good in a lot of decks. How many times have we seen the Great Parliament being played?
Yeah, very similar to Great Parliament, but it has insane flexibility compared to Great Parliament because Great Parliament can't be played as power, whereas Serpent Hive can. And its Inscribe is still better than Khan's Inscribe. Its Inscribe is not terrible. Its Inscribe kills Night Dojo, for instance, any site with 1 health remaining, or 1 health to begin with. Especially in Expedition, right? Serpent Hive kill Night Dojo. I think it won't be like the least common thing. The 1 damage to enemy player, I guess in an aggro deck it's fine. It's interesting how this card is decent in aggro decks too, for that respect. Where if you're playing ground units, you can pick them up and hit the opponent. If you play for power, you still get to deal them 1 damage, which is the worst thing ever. And in a control deck, the 1 damage to any player blows up whatever face agents they had, right? So that's the big upside there for the control deck, right? 1 damage to any player in a mid-range or control deck doesn't really matter, but getting rid of their face agents so then you can, cast Exploit on them or use Orene Scepter suddenly makes this card a lot more relevant. And obviously, must be said, this is a spell that costs more than 5 or more and has Inscribe and makes units. So this is definitely the spell that I think Volatility has been waiting for. Out of all these spells, it does everything I could want in a spell, right? It makes a sizable board state to help defend you. It deals with certain threats that couldn't otherwise be dealt with in Volatility decks, namely face, Aegis, and sites. And it also has Inscribe, which means it's just a power when it needs to be. So I think this is definitely the Volatility card of the set.
I also think this might be good in even-handed Golem because then you have opportunities to play the Inscribe because you can only add up to even costs in even-handed Golem, and it also counts as a hit for Grenahen. So
yes, it does.
Yeah, that's the deck that comes to mind when I think of something that's trying to hit with Grenahen.
What about like even Haru that can play both the plated Goliath and Serpent Hive? You can play both of them.
But then you can't get it off of Grenahen, and that's the whole
What about
point.
3 faction where you can play this and... No, I'm just kidding. Severin and Inevitable is a legendary. It is 3 Shadow for an 0/1 with Revenge. When you play a non-Nightmare unit, you may take 2 debt to give it +1 attack and Revenge. Then it becomes a Nightmare. So it provides a 2 tax everything you play, but it gets a buff, and then it's much harder to remove. This card, I don't have ideas on how good this card is or is not. Obviously, I think you should look for people like the Boxer, who are definitely try to make this card work. This is a card that I don't really care about that much personally, but is a card that I know a lot of people are excited for, so I just wanted to mention it.
Yeah, taking debt, I think, is a big deal on this one. I mean, I think this is going to be Tactic most of the time.
Next card I want to discuss, Saloon Massacre. So, if you remember last time where I said this was the set of Wrath effects, how naive we all were. There are so many more Wrath effects in the set. They did not spoil 3 different Wrath effects. There are 3 Wraths that we have not discussed yet in Cold Hunt. The first of these is Saloon Massacre. 2 Shadow for a spell. Each unit gets -1/-1 this turn, but you can contract 3. They get -1/-4 instead. So if you remember a card called Strain to Shadows, this is Strain to Shadows without the permanent decrease that also is 2+3 cost instead of 5 cost, and has the flexibility of just making it so if your opponent only has X1s, you can wipe the board that way. This card is really good.
Yeah, a lot of the aggro decks nowadays has a ton of X1s, so being able to play it just for 2 in order to give -1/-1 is a relevant mode in this. And then you can deal with the bigger threats by giving them -1/-4. So yeah, I mean, this is going to kill a lot of stuff. What can we say about it?
It's a 2-cost harsh rule, kind of.
I mean, you have to take on the contract, right?
Yes. So 2 plus 3, but the thing is that you can play it with 2 open power, right? And the upside there, yeah, you skip your next turn, but presumably you skip your opponent's past 3 turns by harsh ruling them for 2 costs. So I think you're okay with skipping your next turn if you wiped your opponent's board of 5 units or whatever.
Yeah, as someone that plays a lot of decks that play small units, this is the sweeper that threatens me the most, that scares me the most, because it's just so flexible, and it seems like it's going to be really tough for aggressive decks to play around. We'll see how it works out, though. I mean, I'm sure that, decks are going to adapt. They always do. Next up is Petra, Auric, Launderer. This is a 5-cost double shadow hero. It has Revenge and Inscribe, so it's part of the 5-cost Inscribe hero cycle. Summon, put all spells from a void of your choice into your deck. Petra gets +1 attack for each. This is a pretty interesting card, and I think it's going to be good in like some sort of control deck and expedition, because the summon will make your future draws better because you'll have a higher density of action in your deck. Not by a ton, but like by a small amount. And then on top of that, it seems like a pretty large unit with Revenge. I don't think that this is going to see a ton of play in aggressive decks, but it does seem interesting for like a control deck or a mid-range deck in Expedition.
Yeah, I think it's a control mid-range card. Inscribe gives it a ton of flexibility, just like the rest of the cycle. If you compare this to, say, Amethyst Monument, which is a 4/4 lifesteal, while lifesteal is relevant, this card's probably just, better 98% of the time than the Amethyst Monument. It's an 0/5 with Revenge compared to a 4/4 without, but that also, should be at least a 3/5. There's not too many Revenge cards like this, where the first time you play it, it has one effect, and the second time you play it, it's bigger effect. Here, the effect is that, let's say there are 3 spells in the void. You play it, it's a 3/5, it dies, it comes back out, there's 3 more spells in the void. Now it's a 6/5 because the effect is a permanent increase, so you get to use it summon twice, so it gets, double dip on the increasing its attacks. I'm surprised we don't have, say, like a 2 and a shadow for a 1/2 Revenge that says, like, summon, get +2 attack, and then it comes out as a 5/2 the next time, just as a card that would exist. I think the only closest we have to that is that Minotaur one that like gives all Minotaurs +2 attack. So this is like the second time we've had a Revenge card that is better on the second Revenge. Oh no, the third time. We have the that one campaign card that when it comes out it plays a Valkyrie wings on itself. The really weird one. It's like a 6-cost 5/3 that when it has Destiny it plays a Valkyrie wings on itself. It's a very weird card.
Yeah, so it's actually great when it comes back, but it's not so good when the first time. Yeah.
Yes.
All right, the next card is basically just a small upgrade. We have Breach the Defenses. It's 2 cost for a Fire Justice fast spell. Deal 3 damage to an enemy or kill an enemy curse. Basically giving you more options for your Seer if you're in Arcano. Do you think the killing an enemy curse moves the needle very much? Seems like it's a good way to clean up permafrost or that new Justice permafrost, but not much else.
I mean, I think this makes this better than Torch in a Rocano deck, especially in Expedition, because notably Expedition has Torch in it. But of course, the thing is you can play both, right? You can play Breach of Defenses and Torch. You don't have to play one or the other. So, but notably, especially in Expedition, we don't have markets, as I said before. So having a flexible card that can either deal 3 to an enemy, which includes sights and their face, or kill an enemy curse, I think the flexibility is there. It's also a fast spell compared to Torch, which is a slow spell. I think that this does have significant upsides over Torch, but obviously, you can play them both, right? You don't have to play one or the other.
Yeah, it definitely seems like you'd play both in a deck like that.
The next card is End of an Era, which is one of my favorite cards. I love it. I mean, it's another Wrath effect, by the way. End of an Era is 5 Time Shadow for a slow spell. Kill each unit, relic, and site with cost 3 or less. If 6 or more cards are killed this way, create and draw Dizo's Office. And Dizo's Office is the old site that for 7 that gave everything lifesteal and had a bunch of other things it did. So this card, you might be like, oh, compared to Aramont's designs, and it's 3 costs more expensive to only up the things it kills by 1, which is sort of true, but also is a little misleading because on one hand, it also kills relics and sites that cost 3 or less, not just units. And on the other side, things that cost 3 is actually pretty different than things that cost 2. If Defile only killed things that cost 2, it would be far, far worse. And that is because, say, in an aggro decks usually go up to 3, maybe they go up to 4, depending on if they're Stone Scar. but they often go up to 3. So if you're playing Air Monster designs against an aggro deck, sometimes you're going to clear their entire board, and sometimes you only kill 2/2 drops, and then they kill you with the 3 drops that are left over. Well, this gets to clear the entire board. So it's, yes, you have to get to 5, but it has upside versus aggro, and then it also has the insane upside of drawing Gizo's office, which seems like it's not going to happen too much, but like I love it. I love it. And look at the art. Like, Sunny, just tell me how much you love this art.
What's going on in the art? Oh, somebody's being thrown off a building.
So this story moment is Gizo being defenestrated by Syl. Syl has taken over the Cabal and is pushing Gizo out the window, and then Syl adopts Gizo's cat.
I see. I haven't been keeping up on the story, but that is pretty funny. I don't think this card's going to see much play in Constructed. It's an interesting way to give Xenon, which has traditionally been a deck that likes like playing big 4-drops and a lot of removal spells, a way of like catching up on the board. But I just don't think that it's going to be that exciting. I certainly don't think that you're going to get to draw Gizo's office very often, unless you're against a deck that goes very wide. And even then, just being able to draw a 7-drop from a card, I don't think that does that much, because presumably if you're playing a sweeper, you have more expensive things to do anyway, and then you certainly don't want to rely on this for that.
But you know what deck this does single-handedly destroy against? Rats. It kills all the rats, and it kills all of the relics.
That's true.
It kills their entire everything. The game ends against rats.
So like it's the end of the era for the Rat King, basically.
Is the Rat King secretly the leader of the Cabal? You tell me.
He's your friend.
I'll have to ask Batteries. Is he the leader of the Cabal?
All right. I'm not saying that I'm not friends with Batteries. I just thought that was going to be a clever comment. Anyway, next card is Nodoran, Auric, Heir. This is a really interesting one. 4 cost for a Shadow Justice card, an Argenport card. It's a 2/5 hero, lifesteal. When Nodoran attacks, she pays off your debts. Entomb, the enemy player takes 3 debt. So you play this card, it dies to, suffocate or whatever, and then your opponent has 3 debt to pay. That's pretty interesting in itself. When a card dies, your opponent has to take on those debts. And then the fact that she also helps with, like, if you have any outstanding debts, I don't know if there are any ways to abuse that, but it certainly seems like something that could be quite powerful. What do you think, Stormblessed? Do you have any good applications for this?
I mean, I guess Severin is the decent enough application for this. If looking at debt thing, I think I'm interested about Nodoran. The first ability of paying off debt seems better in limited, but the second ability seems better in constructed. Because in limited, there's a lot more contract floating about, and paying off the contracts kind of feel better. And the Entomb is less punishing in limited because, in limited you're often taking turns off and making inefficient plays anyways, so it's not super punishing. But in constructed, the opponent plays harsh rule, and suddenly their harsh rule costs 3 extra. Slay costs 6 to get rid of Nodoran. So Nodoran has this interesting sort of play pattern of being tempo positive upon being removed by anything, except for, I guess, silence effects. The downside to Nodoran is that Nodoran is just a 2/5 lifesteal. She's not really a huge threat by herself, so you kind of need something to support her, to push her up the curve a little bit, to make her more threatening, to be more worth removing. But of course, once you make her more worth removing, then suddenly having the opponent take 3 debt is less punishing. So if you put so you can say the most basic thing ever, like a Crown Latch Longstar on her, and make her a 4/7 lifesteal, you've now put 6 power and 2 cards into her. And so if the opponent plays Slay, it's less punishing to pay 6 for a Slay because your opponent also paid 6 and had to invest a secondary card. So it's got interesting tension. So I think that's a good design card in that respect.
Yeah, it does seem like it has some problems because it's so easily answered by Permafrost, right? If you're against an aggressive deck where the 2/5 lifesteal you would think it's good, it's not nearly as good as Roland there because Permafrost hits this and not Roland. So it will be interesting to see if it can slip into anything. But having played with a lot of the card that says Decimate doesn't decimate your power, like you get your decimates for free, that was an extremely powerful effect. And I could see there being a contract somewhere that I haven't taken a look at yet that is really good with Nodoran.
How do you feel about Nodoran with Devour or Sacrifice effects, where you get to control when your opponent loses power?
Well, I mean, it would be really interesting. You could theoretically set up some sort of loop, right, where you're just You're like Rashad importing your opponent, making it so that they don't have any power to have access to. At that point, it doesn't matter how much you're winning by. As long as you're winning by a little bit, then you can lock your opponent out of the game and just attack with a 1/1 however many turns. So, like, that's kind of interesting. I don't know how that would be set up. You have to be able to recur this a lot, but it's not completely out of the question, right?
Either way, I think the card is cool. But moving on, for whatever reason, just how everything stacked up, I got all the board clears to read out. The next card on the list is Nothing Remains, which is the third board clear that was left unspoiled. Nothing Remains is 4 Justice, Justice, Shadow, Shadow for a slow spell. Kill all units and give them Voidbound. This is better Harsh Rule, more influence gated, of course, at 4 cost.
Yeah, this is definitely opening up a lot of eyes among people. I don't think it's going to be too much of a problem because the influencer costs are so heavy. That just makes it so that it's not going to grief as many people. A lot of people might be playing the Argenport deck that this might fit into, but then hopefully there are going to be ways to combat that deck if you know exactly what factions they're playing. You can play this on turn 3 if you need to, with Lost Scroll on turn 2 and then this on turn 3 if you're playing an Argenport deck. And that's pretty crazy. We haven't had that so far. Now, there are other Wrath effects that you could have played earlier than 5, right? Hailstorm usually kills most things by the time that you play it, right? And then you have ways of answering the bigger units. But boy, 4 cost board clear. This is going to, you're going to see a lot of posts about this on Reddit.
Giving things Voidbound is also not irrelevant with cards like Sinister Rumors in the game at the moment that are heavily played. There is a fair number of cards that recur or care about recursion, and this card incidentally shuts them down. I think this card is absurd. I wouldn't be surprised if Sunny's right and the card isn't overbearing, but I wouldn't be surprised if this card didn't go up to 5 because it is just a strictly better harsh rule as well. So like they could put up to 5 and maybe like move like 1 shadow or something, right? 2 justice, 1 shadow, put it to 5 cost or something. This is one of those cards on the short list of cards that I think could be nerfed in the future. It's not. I mean, there are a lot of cards that are super unlikely to be nerfed. Like the Uncountable is very unlikely to be nerfed, but Nothing Remains is far more likely than most other cards in the set to be nerfed in the future.
Yeah, we'll definitely see a lot of people asking for it to be nerfed, whether it deserves to be or not. All right, the next card is also an Argenport card. A lot of interesting Argenport cards. In fact, out of the 5 Argenport cards in this set, I think only one of them doesn't have constructed implications, and even then, like, that card's pretty good. It's like a bomb in draft. But this is Raniya, Wings of the Cabal. It's a 5 cost, 5/3 flying ambush that is 1 justice and 3 shadow. So pretty heavy influence requirements. Has contract 4. Kill an enemy unit with lower attack than health. The enemy player discards each copy from their deck. This card seems incredible to me if there are a lot of cards that it can kill. Like, it just depends on how much of an Icaria it is, right? If you have 5 cost, contract 4, flying ambush, attacks for a reasonable amount, and if it can reliably kill things, I think that this card's incredible. But I just don't know how many cards in Constructed are going to be targets for this, and we'll just really have to wait and see.
If it kills things 50% of the time, it's probably good enough. You might remember there was a 5/3 flying ambush for 5 Elysian in the past in set 1, and this card obviously is that card with 2 more influence, and it also kills a unit, so, it's a lot better than another card. And that other card, I think, almost got there a couple times and was, just on the edge of playability. So being on the edge of playability with a good effect is really good. This card having ambush is really powerful. It also fits into the detain they all fall strategy because you want to make their attack low and then you can abuse that privilege or something. I don't know. Maybe there's a fun expedition deck if detain is an expedition involving detain, Raniya, and they all fall as just sort of like fun meme stuff. As far as like, more constructed, more powerful things, it's also a 5 cost card for Know Thy Enemy potentially. Having ambush is also relevant in a control deck like Know Thy Enemy is. I don't know if the influence could be supported in Know Thy Enemy because 3 shadow is a lot for that deck. But, it's an ambush card, it's a contract card, it's 5 cost. It definitely deserves having this 4 influence, triple shadow influence because it's a card and a half.
Yeah, notably, it kills Sandstorm Titan. Like, if
Oh,
you're
yeah.
playing some sort of Valkyrie deck that cares about having a lot of Valkyries, and then obviously a big problem for you is you have to be able to kill Sandstorm Titan every time. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to attack. So that's one part of it. And for Know the Enemy, it's in the same factions. So that's a good starting point.
So the final card to discuss is Greater Plans. Our last power in the set, Greater Plans, is a factionless power. Gain an influence in a faction of one of your heroes or a hero in your hand. So notably, if you have a hero in your hand, it will always help you play that hero, but it will not help you fix. If you're, say, for example, playing Elysian and your hero is Jarl, it'll give you Primal. But if you want to play Master Conjurer, it doesn't give you influence. So you do have to be playing multi-faction heroes for this to be fixing, or playing mono-faction heroes of a span like 50-50 split of mono-faction heroes. That being said, it is obviously a powerful effect because it comes into play undepleted and provides influence.
Yeah, I think that in some sort of like Recano deck that cares about heroes, because there's that. Did we talk about the equipment that gives +1/+1 or +3/+3 if it's a hero? We
Nope.
might have just totally skipped it. Okay, there's an equipment that costs 1 that gives +3/+3 if it's on a hero. So like a deck that uses that and cares about weapons and wants undepleted power, this could be pretty good in, I think. But I think that's basically going to be it.
Maybe Yetis, Yeti heroes.
Yeti
There's
heroes.
there's a number of Yetis that are also heroes.
Yeah, that is true. I wonder how many of them are actually depicted in Thudrock's masterwork. The Mount Slushmore of Yeti heroes.
We know that Torque is a hero. We know that we got a couple other Yeti heroes. We have Yeti Ambassador, which is also a card that benefits from having heroes. So I'm saying Yeti heroes, the deck of the future. Okay, that's about it for our constructed set review. It took a while to go over the remaining cards, but there was a good number of them. They're all pretty interesting, especially 3 more board clears. But we're moving on to draft. Draft was revamped. It's no longer a set 11 draft, and draft is much better. I mean, yes, it's day 1, 2, whatever. So maybe we'll decide in the end that it's also a bad draft format. But I'm optimistic. Inscribe is already feeling amazing to play with. So on that end alone, the set's already so much better.
Yeah, less stealth and valor units automatically means that it's better. Although you still have to deal with them, which is very frustrating. Like, as soon as I got into my first draft and my opponent played a stealthy, I was like, I don't want to play anymore. I'm just so tired of it.
So notably, the draft pack has more diversity in its ratings than ever. Every card has a weighting, and the weighting is relative to the other cards of its rarity. So if you have a common that is 5x common, it means that it is 5 times as likely to see this common as a card that is 1x common. So Ursa Squadron is, I believe, a 1x common, which means that one of the standout Valor cards. Also, I think Populous Control is also a 1x common. You'll see those cards like less often than you'll see most rares, honestly, which is crazy. But there's more weightings now than there's ever been before. We have cards at 1x rarity, 3x, 6x, 9x, 12x, and 18x. And I believe the 18x are most of the stealth cards.
Yeah, if you want to take a closer look at this, go ahead and find the link in the description to the Shiftstone article where SRFS, our editor, shows you which cards are weighted. But yeah, I'm glad that we don't have to fight against Ursa Squadrons every other game. That was frustrating, to say the least.
Yeah, not having Earth Squadron, not having Populous Controller, it's much better. The Valor cards, the really quintessential ones from the previous format, are much less likely, which is good because it means we have a different format now. We're not playing with it against the same cards as previously. So the other big thing about the set is that there's a lot of removal and interaction, and there's a ton of sweepers, right? I think like 8 sweepers in Cold Hunt, maybe like 7 sweepers in Cold Hunt, and you have Harsh Rule, and you might have other sweepers in the draft pack. I know you have Harsh Rule. You want sweepers in Expedition, right? How about all of them? So playing around sweepers in Limited for the first time ever might not be the worst thing to do, if you can.
Yeah, definitely. And a lot of them are damage based, right? There's a primal one that's uncommon that deals 2 damage to everything. There's the Elysian one that deals 2 damage to everything. Then there's like the Skycrag rare that deals 4 to everything. So it's kind of nice that you can like grow your units out of the sweeper range. So there's actually like, stuff that you can do to prepare if your opponent has a sweeper.
It's interesting, yes. There are ways to play around it and there are ways to play with it. It doesn't necessarily mean you should be playing around it all of the time because that is still ridiculous. You should play at your hand. But basically, if you're ahead, in the past it was you're foolish to play around Harsh Rule because it's a 1 card and you should just try winning the game as quickly as possible. But now it's kind of like if you have, a significant advantage over your opponent, it might be reasonable to just think a little bit about board clears they could possibly have and then maybe play around it because it's more likely now than ever before if it's in their factions.
Yeah. The other side of this is that I don't think aggro is very good in this format. Part of it is that fire just seems very underwhelming from a unit standpoint, and we'll talk more about that later. But if you can't go wide, or like if there's a danger to going wide, it might not be the best time to play an aggro deck. And well, this format is very grindy. Like Stormblessed said, the interaction and the removal it's very plentiful, and I think it's very good too.
Contract lends itself to some slower games. For example, like Warrior Monk, it not only gains you 5 life, which slows the game down, but it also has Contract 5, which slows the game down because it means you can't play a turn next turn. So you can't, capitalize on your 6/5 quite as easily if you're paying the contract. So contract plus fire being a little bit worse means that aggro is quite not as good. And some are calling this the format of 6 drops. We'll see if that day 1 wisdom holds up, but they have a higher stock price than they've ever had before.
Yeah, the other thing about contract is that if you are really far behind on board, you can oftentimes take on a contract to make it so that your opponent doesn't have a good attack on the next turn.
Yeah, contract's also a good way to catch up because it allows you to gain tempo now in exchange for tempo later, and tempo now can be just what you need to catch up in a game.
Importantly, most of the cards that have contract are going to be like better defensive than they are offensive, because if you put an offensive contract on too many cards, then well, people just die immediately. But yeah, I think it all just leads to the fact that this format is pretty slow. So look for your value plays, look for your expensive cards.
Definitely, though, the main hallmark of the format and one of the most fun parts of the format is the Inscribe mechanic. There's a ton of cards with Inscribe, and it really changes and impacts both drafting and the gameplay itself. So, Sonny, would you like to start the discussion on how Inscribe impacts the format?
Yeah, so first of all, the really expensive cards with Inscribe, there's a 4/4 Relic Weapon Injustice, there's a 4/4 Aegis in Primal that costs 6, there's the Carnosaur Beta, which is a 5/5 that costs 7 in time. These cards I've found are just very good. Like something that can be a power early or a threat late, everything's a monument, basically, right? I found them to be very good and limited so far, and you're seeing a lot of those types of cards determine games because they like dodge a lot of the small removal, and they never rot in people's hands because they can just be inscribed. It also means that splashing is a lot easier. Like, let's say you have 3 Carnosaur betas or something. Yeah, you can just go ahead and play all of them and play like 1 time sigil. Because if you draw 1, then you get your time source. If you draw 2, then you have your time source and your 7 drop. So it works out pretty well.
I don't necessarily think Carnosaur Beta is the best example here of that because I don't think you should splash 4 Carnosaur Beta. But a better example, in my opinion, would be if you're, say, in Recano, but you got access to like a Time Invoke card. Then you play your Time Invoke card and you play 3 Carnosaur Betas and a Time Sigil. And that way you can also have the benefit of the Carnosaur Betas. But more importantly, you're splashing for some sort of really extra powerful card where the Carnosaur Beta just allows you to splash it basically for free almost. If you're playing this format, you really want to have inscribed cards because you want to only play 15 power. If you don't have enough inscribed cards, if you only have like 2 inscribed cards and one of them is Evelina, you probably should play 18 power still. But if you've got like 6 inscribed cards, go to 15 power. You'll be very happy.
Yeah,
You definitely want to. You want to be playing 15 power. You want to get those inscribed cards.
I agree. You want as many inscribed cards as you can, and you want 15 power in your decks. That's what I've found so far.
Good inscribed cards. You don't want to be playing only dismantles. You don't want to be playing like 6 dismantles, but
yeah,
like 1 dismantle is fine, but you don't want to be playing like 3 dismantles.
I found most inscribed cards to be just very good. One of my favorites is the one that discards 2 cards and steals their void. Yeah, that
Yes.
like 4 cost, discard 2 cards. Hold up was like okay, it was an okay card in certain formats. In this card, it's phenomenal.
I mean, inscribed just is an insane advantage over non-inscribed because we'll get to other advantages to eavesdrop later. But yeah, eavesdrop is a very good card because basically being able to play power a significant portion of the time, but then have this other option like later in the game, just eavesdrop the last 2 cards of your opponent's hand is really really good.
Yeah, so take any inscribed card much higher than you would normally.
To continue with this sort of inscribed talk about how splashing works, well, obviously everyone can splash any faction depending on what you get, right? If you get like 3 Bannermans and 2 off-faction seats, or like a Tome or whatever, or like a Seek Power, yeah, you can, any faction can be splashed. But you are more likely to splash Shadow or Justice than you are to splash Primal. And that is based entirely off of the quality of its common inscribed cards. So Primal's best common inscribed card is Snowpeak Eagle. But unfortunately, Snowpeak Eagle is double Primal, which means you can't really splash with Snowpeak Eagle because you can never actually play it. It's always just depleted its Primal Sigil. But in Shadow, you have Eavesdrop and Call the Hit as major good Inscribe cards in Shadow, which allow you to enable you to say splash Victimless Crime or other forms of Shadow removal. So Shadow tends to be a little bit easier to splash than Primal, and Justice likewise has decent Inscribe cards enabling splashes for its higher impact cards.
Yeah, for sure. Since splashing is so viable, being open while you're drafting is very good. Like, if you see a powerful card, especially if it has Inscribe, go ahead and take it. If you are going to make a speculative pick on a really strong card outside your factions, I would be more inclined to do so than I would be in previous formats. I just find that you end up being able to play most of the cards that you take, and you just have more flexibility to be able to make a speculative pick like that.
This is a format where the really difficult about drafting is the cutting cards. What cards do you cut from your draft pool is harder in this format than any other format we've seen. Another good reason to be open is the multi-faction card with Invoke. If you're in Justice, if you see Sweet Dreams, you can be like, okay, I'm picking up my Sweet Dreams now, and I will play either Primal or Shadow as my secondary faction, and then I will splash the other one. And so staying open in one faction allows you to take a multi-faction uncommon and splash the one of the two factions in that place, and then choose the other one, whichever one of those two is the most open. Being open is really good. And of course, because this format is such a high power level format, it is rewarded to open. If you commit pick one to like Huru, and then you see like a Searing Fist in like 8th pick, and you're like, oh, I can't really take the Searing Fist. That's kind of a little sad. But if you say open, you see these late Searing Fists, you can just snap them up. So being a high power format with high power level cards means that staying open also is beneficial there.
Yeah, all those multi-faction cards that Invoke, I've been really impressed by them. They seem so good.
Sometimes even splash both of those factions.
Yeah, so for those who weren't there or didn't see the picture in the Discord, I was drafting late at night with Stormblessed along for the ride, and I was getting annoyed because Stormblast was such a good card. So, so I was in the Legion deck, and I took the Argenport uncommon, the one that gives +1/+1 to one of your units, -1/-1 to your opponent's units, and invokes, and I insisted on playing it and warping my deck so that I could play it. And I got to 7 wins in that draft. I went 7-1. I did not play Stolen Augmentation once, though.
Had it in hand 3 times, never played it once. But
Oh,
either
come
way,
on.
I mean, the rest of the deck was fine. It was just this one Stolen Augmentation. But Sunny was doing it to troll me, so I can't really complain that much.
The majority of the times that was in my hand I didn't play it was actually because I had to redraw those hands.
No. I mean, I'm talking about during the game. One of those times was the last turn of the game, though, when you drew it off the top and then you just killed your opponent. But it was great.
Oh, yeah, that was true.
There was also a time where you had it in hand. You're about to win. You're like, please, draw Stolen. No, you had the influence for it because Sunny very rarely had, the influence to play it. And so he finally had the influence, and he was like, please draw it, please. But he never drew it, and he killed the opponent. He's like, no, I had to win. Why couldn't my opponent have stayed in the game longer?
Yeah, all this is to say, splashing is viable. The multi-faction invoke cards are very, very strong, and being able to splash them with or without the help of Inscribe is probably something you want to keep the door open for.
You probably can't splash. Well, I mean, obviously you can. You're right. If you get like 3 Bannermans and a seat, whatever, you can splash basically any card. But so let's move on to talking about the commons of the set and sort of like roughly what commons are doing in the 5 factions. Going in Fire, Time, Justice, Primal, Shadow order. We'll start with Fire. Fire is pretty weak, but their best cards are very, very good.
Yeah, I think Fire has some of the best common removal spells. Searing Fist, Hoof Stomp, and Torch, which is in the draft pack somehow, are all just extremely efficient, powerful removal spells. I mean, it might tempt you, but like if you look around at Fire's other commons, you really don't have many good units. You've got the 3/3 flyer, it's like Thunder Wing or something. You have a couple good ones in like the 4/3 Revenge, the captain.
So Caldarian Captain is 5 and a fire for a 4/3 Revenge. Your other units have +1 attack. And it looks kind of unassuming at the face of it because it's a 4/3 for 5, which is like pretty low stat line. But there's a card that it's very similar to, and that's the 2/3 Shift in Shadow that also said your other units have +1 attack. And that card ended up being very good. Yeah. And in some ways, Caldarian Captain is a better form of that because it has a higher attack on by itself, and it also has Revenge, which means if they kill it, it comes back. So it looks unassuming, but it plays more powerfully than it might look.
Yeah, so those commons are very good, but it's not very deep. You look at the units that Fire has, there's like the Rage Bot, I think it's called, the 1/1 Revenge, it's not very
Danger
good.
Bot, Danger Will Robinson.
Danger Bot, sorry. Yeah, you just don't have great stats to deal with. You get a little bit of help from the draft packs, but if you're playing an aggressive deck and Fire's your main faction, it might be tough to cobble together an aggressive curve. Much better, I think, to use Fire as a support faction for those powerful removal spells, or as a faction to splash.
My most recent deck is a Praxis deck that's super heavy in time, but I've got 3 Searing Fists and a couple other fire cards that are also quite playable, supporting with these good fire cards that do exist. Notably, fire is less likely to be easily splashed because their inscribed commons are Warning Shot and Molten Feet, and Molten Feet is playable. Units can only be so bad, especially at 4 costs, but like a 3/2 charge for 4 is pretty below the curve. So a warning
Yeah,
shot is fine as like a one of, but you really don't want it playing more than one warning shot.
yeah, for sure. All right, going on to Time. Time has some fantastic units, as it should. I mean, that's Time's faction identity. But the big units are really good. We talked about Carnosaur Beta being the 7-cost 5/5 Revenge. Very powerful. There's the Warrior Monk, which is a 6/5 that has a contract to gain life for 6. Those are very powerful cards. I've liked them so far. And on top of that, it has like a lot of good medium-sized units. There's a 4/3 that has a contract to give a unit +1/+1 overwhelm. I know there's like Horned Vorlunk, the 3/4 overwhelm in the draft packs. Anything else coming to mind that's just like good stats on time units, Stormblessed?
Not necessarily good stats, but like Saddled Sarasaur. Yes, it's 2+3 for a 2/2 in the sense, but giving a unit killer even for that cost is still quite good. It's expensive for that killer effect, but like killer is a really powerful ability. Time's also a lot easier to splash than fire because it has more inscribed cards at common. Carnosaur Beta, Vow of Silence, Lost in Thought, and Dismantle. It has I think 4 inscribed cards at common,
Yeah.
which is more than 2. And out of its commons, really the worst 2 uncommons are Emburden and Nascent Wisps. But even those 2 are still, not unplayable, right? And the rest of time cards, Forestall, you don't want to play like 3 Forestalls, but like the first Forestall as your like 30th card is not the worst thing ever. So time's pretty deep. While it doesn't have as many highs as fire, it also doesn't have as many lows, which is why time, it seems like, will be a main faction for a lot of people.
Yeah, I actually like Forestall quite a bit. It's been really good for me, especially since the format is slower, so that you
Oh
have
yeah.
a chance to hold up the 3-cost fast spell. Yeah, I don't think I'm playing 3, but I
Yes.
think I'd probably be happy to play 2 most of the time.
Really?
Yeah,
I'm currently on 1 Forestall as being happy to play, but maybe I'll try out 2 and see how that works out.
yeah. Going on to Justice, I have no experience with Justice yet. Have not drafted in any of my decks, except that 7-win draft where I splashed the 1 Justice card, but that doesn't seem like it counts.
I have played a number of Justice decks, and I have Splash Justice, and I've done Justice-y things. Justice is sort of midway between Time and Fire as far as having high highs and low lows. It's deeper than Fire, which is why you often see potentially more of it in your decks. But unlike Time, it's a little bit less deep, but it has a little bit more powerful stuff. Justice is also relatively splashable because it has Rune Sword and Starkist Wings as its premier inscribed commons. Starkist Wings, of course, being an insanely good common because while a 5-cost +2/+1 flying weapon is completely terrible, having Inscribe makes it very, very good because you can just play it for an Inscribe and feel good about it, or you can throw it on a unit and kill your opponent by like picking up, a 3/5 Endurance Valor, which is also really good. We'll get to that in a second. It also has Mithril Guardian, which is solid as like a 1 or 2 of in a deck. If you have other cards, you can make its value go up, but again, has Inscribe, so it makes the card really good. Shiftstone Sniper, just a solid common, right? You're never going to be too unhappy to play one of those. Just has some solid cards. Notably, the premier Valor unit of this format is Last Light Refugee, which is 5 Justice for a 3/5 Endurance Valor. And it's a lot more fun to play with and against than Populous Controller because it's just more dynamic of a card. Populous Controller was just kind of like unblockable. You couldn't really double block it. It was easy to blow out. It was just a 6/6. But Last Light Refugee is a 3/5 on Valor, which means that, if you double block it, it's only a 5/7 now, not like an 8/8. And also, it's a 3/5, so it doesn't beat you down quite as hard. So you have more turns to try to interact with it than you did Populous Controller. And it has endurance. So like just having this not XX stat line makes Valor more interesting. Having endurance makes the card play more interestingly. And having a lower attack means that the card has more turns to be interacted with before it's going to kill you. So much better than Populous Controller as far as play pattern goes.
Yeah, Last Light Refugee has been very good. I'm actually not a gigantic fan of Starkist Wings. I think it's fine, but I think there are a fair number of ways to blow it out, especially since Rule Disguise is such a prominent removal spell in Primal. So, like, anytime you play Starkist Wings on something, you're really opening it up to blowouts from a Primal deck. Yeah, I mean, Justice seems solid from the games that I've played against it. One thing I want to point out is Shiftstone Sniper, which is the 2-cost summon draw card, +1/+1 weapon. I think that card's pretty good in Rakano. Like, I think that has a lot of synergy with a lot of different cards in those factions.
I think it's also pretty good in Haru because you can slap it on a flyer.
Yeah, you can slap it on a flyer. But I think there's like a lot of important synergies that enables in Rakano decks. So just keep an eye out for it if you're playing Rakano.
Yeah, so then we got Primal. Their premier Inscribe is Snowpeak Eagle, which is very good. You want to be picking up these highly because they will be the backbone of your Primal decks as far as commons are concerned. Beyond Snowpeak Eagle, they have a mix of decent removal with Thudrock's Ruse and Caloric Mix, both acting as relatively similar pieces to one another. The reason that Primal, I think, is less good on the splash is because, again, Snowpeak Eagle is a Inscribe card that you don't really want to be playing as a splash. And their other 3 Inscribe cards are Ice Over, which is 3 cost on enemy unit Aegis, Scale Hide, which is +1/+3 for 3, and then Jotun Spellhammer. None of which are particularly thrilling. They're solid, and you'll definitely play them in your Primal decks, but they're not really worth splashing for, even if it means that you get to freely splash something else. So it's a little bit harder to splash Primal because their Inscribed cards are a little bit more suited to being in your deck rather than being the splash card for your deck.
I think Primal is the best faction in this format so far. First of all, Snowpeak Eagle is so insane. Like,
Yes.
the fact that it's a 2/3, the body is very good for ruling the skies. It inscribes, of course, and it has Aegis, which in this format where there's a lot of good removal, I think is really big deal. Also, Jotun Spellhammer is the other inscribe card, 6 cost, 4/4 Aegis inscribe. That card has been very good in my experience. Primal also has really good removal that's flexible, and I think that's something that Primal's removal hasn't been in the past. Like, Caloric Mix can kill something small for cheap, or it can kill something big for a little more expensive. It also has Rule Disguise, which has been really good in my experience with it, and then it also has some really powerful uncommons, like Stormblast is really good. It's very good removal. It's just very good insurance when you're trying to deal with a pump spell. It just deals with cards that have contracts so well, because a lot of those contract cards are cheap. They cost less than 4, but Stormblast still negates them.
You know, it's a card that I see at like more than I should. Cloudline Shaman. Like, I'll see that like 8th pick, and I'm like, I guess I'll pick up this Cloudline Shaman. Oh, look, no, I recently had a draft where I was like, oh boy, this is a very middling draft. And then in pack 4, 7th, 8th pick Cloudline Shaman, and I was like, okay, this draft is now suddenly great.
Yeah, geez, that's so many stats. It makes it so that your opponent can't attack you, and that you can probably attack them on the next turn.
Yeah.
And worth noting that the shaman itself does not have flying. I was definitely fooled by that the first time I played it. The last thing that I wanted to talk about in Primal is that I think Yeti Intellectual is actually a pretty good card in this format, just because of how grindy it is. Like, I think it's pretty much a must-answer threat at a 4-cost 2/2, and I don't think the aggro decks are good enough to make it so that it's not good. If you can keep the path clear for this card, especially if you're playing like Skycrag and have the good fire removal, I think you can get a lot of attacks with this and draw a lot of cards with it.
If you attack and trade into a 2/2 or even a 3/2 because they have to block and they can't let it sit there, that's fine, right? But you'd pay 4 for deal 2 damage, draw a card. I'd pay 4 for deal 2 damage, draw a card. That obviously, yes, it has downside. If the opponent has, a bunch of 4/3s, it can be a little bit harder to attack and do it right, but it plays well with combat tricks. It's a solid card. So to finish out the set of factions, we have Shadow. And I think Shadow is one of the easiest to splash because Shadow has very good commons for splashing purposes. Call the Hit and Eavesdrop as the 2 inscribed cards of the set. So the Eavesdrop, you see this one, run later than other inscribed cards, right? You're going to see this later than Eagles or Rune Hammers or Betas probably, because it's worse. It's worse to just play outwards. But it's also situational. Call the Hit's all situational. So both of them being situational cards makes them really useful for splashing purposes. And then one of their best commons is Midnight Hunter, which also is pretty good on the splash for the 6-drop. Their other best common is Cabal Embezzler, which is also a 6-drop. One of the reasons that this format is slow is that the Shadow 6-drops are good, and the time 6 drop is good, and the Primal 6 drop is good. You're getting the picture here. The time 7 drop is good. This is a weird format. But Shadow is not quite as deep as Time, Justice, or Primal because it has cards like Tanuki Saboteur, which is a 2/1 for 3. Runebinder is okay, but it's nothing spectacular. Ritual Dagger is nothing spectacular. Collude is pretty meh. Left-Right Trapper is pretty bleh. Right, so it's got a number of good cards. It's got a number of bad cards, but the good cards also just happen to coincidentally be good on the splash or for splashing purposes. So that's why I think Shadow is pretty likely to be a splash target.
Yeah, Shadow has a lot of good removal. It's got Victimless Crime, which is an uncommon but kills so many things. It's got Soul Feast at common that deals with a lot of things. Also, gaining life is a big deal. And it also has Cut Ties in the draft packs. And Midnight Hunter. I've been impressed by Midnight Hunter so far, which basically casts Combust when you play it.
Cut Ties is as likely to see as Torch.
Okay.
Which are both 9x commons.
Yeah, so that's pretty reasonable. I've also been tremendously impressed by both of the common Inscribe cards. Well, I mean the good Inscribe cards, Eavesdrop and Call the Hit. Like Call the Hit hits the what am I thinking of? The 2/2 flyer with Infiltrate, Serpent Trainer.
Serpent Trainer, yeah. Call the Hit hits a number of things that you care about, and then if you don't care about things or if you just need power, it has Inscribe, which is why it's really good, because if it didn't have Inscribe, it obviously would be very not great. It'd be pretty bad probably, but having Inscribe pushed it over the top.
It's so good. It's incredible. If you are under threat early, it kills something, and if you're not, you just inscribe it and you're fine. It's one that you can make the decision whether to inscribe it or not fairly early, I think, and that makes it even better. Because like if you're sitting at 6 power, are you really going to inscribe one of your 7 drops? You're going to feel a little worse about it at the very least. So yeah, I've been impressed by Shadow so far.
And then multi-faction stuff, basically, they're all good except for the Elysian one, which is kind of less good. But the rest of them are basically rewards for being in those factions. If you're in those factions, you can take those and feel pretty happy about your life. Ravaturgist is very solid. Breach Defense is a great removal spell. Twin Flame Broom, a little bit expensive, but plays well with Pump, and also is just, flying 2/4, which is fine. Stonebreaker Bow, solid removal with flexibility. Dive Bomber, flyer with flexible removal attached to it. Torgau's Wares, pretty bleh. That's like the worst one. Indifference, very solid piece of interaction at cheap cost. It costs 1. Disarm, solid removal spell. Unseen Marksman, both good interaction and just a solid body at 2 cost 3/3 that also gives the enemy unit -1 attack if you need to. That's really good, especially in draft. And then Bog Fumes is just a bit of solid removal. Interaction, I guess. Not necessarily removal. I mean, you don't want to play too many Bog Fumes, but, the first Bog Fumes you'll never be unhappy to play.
Yeah, but I think flying is, like, pretty important in this format.
Yeah, that's why the first Bog Fumes you'd never be unhappy to play.
Yeah. I mean, I was playing, like, 3 Rule Disguise, and it's not too different from Bog Fumes in what it does.
Bog Fumes is better than Rule Disguise most of the time.
I don't know. I'm not sure. Like, the thresholds do matter. 2 damage on the ground is much better than -1/-1, even though it costs 3 times as much. But that's beside the point. I think that having things that can deal with flyers is a pretty big deal. Flying is more relevant than it normally is.
I mean, is it? Isn't flying just always, like, super relevant?
There have been some really aggressive formats where I don't think flying has been that good.
Like, Blast format, I guess, was less relevant because you weren't blocking anyways
you can't
ever.
Block anyway. Everything has unblockable.
The thing about flying is that units put their power into having flying. For example, the Eagle, the Stowe Peak Eagle, it's putting power in having flying because otherwise it's just the 2/3 with Aegis for 4, which is not very good. So it's only good if you have other flyers to interact with, or if you care about the evasion in some way. If everyone's attacking with 4/4s, Snow Peak Eagle would be complete garbage. So when everyone's attacking and no one's ever blocking, flying gets a lot worse because you don't care about the evasion anyways.
Yes, correct. All right, let's talk about some specific cards that have really stood out. I've liked a lot of the 4/3s for 4. There are a bunch of them. I don't think I should go over all of them, but seems like a pretty good stat line for whatever reason in this format, having 3 or more health and then being able to attack for 4. We've already mentioned Snow Peak Eagle. I think that's impressed both of us quite a bit. And Yeti Intellectual as another common primal unit I've really liked. Midnight Hunter and Stormblessed likes the other 6-drop in Shadow, which I haven't been able to bring myself to play yet.
I was told by people's opinions that I trust that it was very good, and I tried it out myself, and it was, in fact, very good. It also plays well with one of your favorite cards, Yeti Intellectual.
I suppose so.
One of my favorite pairings is sort of the Radiant Twins, another new Radiant pairing we have. Namora the Pure and Aromon the Punishing. Both of those are really good. Well, Aromon has Sunny's favorite stat line, which is 4-3 for 4. That just incidentally, if the board is stalled, it just slowly pings them every turn to kill them. And then Namora the Pure is a 3-4 for 4. And it just gains you life, gaining you 1 life per turn. That's pretty good to help you stabilize, to help you come back. Just a decent stat line. So I think the two of them are pretty good uncommons that can fit into basically any time or shadow deck. Notably, I just achieved a really, really good combo today. So Aromon the Punishing plus Hunter's Harpoon makes a 5/4 that says, whenever they take damage from this card, draw a card. And Aromon says deal them 1 damage for every draw they turn. So I drew a card at the end of every one of my opponent's turns once I played that combo out, because they always are going to draw cards. They're always going to take 1 from Aromon, which is always going to draw me a card.
Sounds like the influence is kind of hard on that.
Why? It's 1 Shadow, 1 Fire, 1 Primal. This
Yeah.
is a flashable format.
Yeah, I mean, it is certainly splashable, but still, you have being able to have a deck. Like, if it's in your deck, then it seems like you could accomplish that pretty easily. But making sure you have a deck with all 3 pieces doesn't seem that repeatable.
No, I'm not saying it's repeatable. I'm saying that there's a lot of interesting things to do, and this was a fun thing I did, and I think that Aromon, even beyond that, was just a good card, right?
Yes.
You're not really wanting to play a bad card and a good card to make a good card, right? That's what we always say. Instead, you're playing a good card and a good card, and you found some sort of insane synergy between the two of them. Is what really happened.
Mm-hmm. All right, another card on our list is Last Light Refugee. That's the 3/5 Endurance Valor for 5 Injustice. That card has been a house. It's great at blocking and attacking. I was really impressed by Stormblast. It just is so flexible, and I don't know. It's good against units. It's good against spells. What more do you want?
Depending on the situation, it can be somewhat easy to hold up 2 power, depending on how contract works, because if you play a big contract card, the next turn you're going to have less power open, and that's when you hold up the Stormblast. For example, if you play Warrior Monk on 6, you play the contract, now you have 5 debt. Next turn you play an undepleted power, and now you have 2 undepleted power. So now all you have left is 2. Stormblast tends to just fit in. Like I wouldn't play a bunch of them. I think like 1 or 2 is probably fine, because again, you can sort of just squeeze it in there pretty easily.
Finally, just a blanket statement on big time cards. They seem to be pretty good.
And one way to combat flyers is just go bigger than the flyers. If you have a 6/5, if you have a 6/6, you can just attack past the flyers pretty easily.
All right, so that's it for our draft review. Stay away from fire unless it's a splash or supporting faction, and play expensive stuff, but make sure you have enough inscribed powers to support them. I think that's my 1 sentence.
If you had to make a super reductionist statement on the format, I think that's a reasonably way to reduce the format into a impossibly poor summary of the format, but
yes.
It does work.
Zero nuance at all. All right, let's talk about the upcoming event. Draft Open is coming up in a week from recording this. It's November 19th through 21st. I'm looking forward to it. In the 2 draft events this season, I've had a very high seed and top 8'd, but not in the same one in the 2 tournaments. So I'm looking forward to another strong performance from myself.
I didn't get quite as good Sunday, but I did top 64 both of them. It's just so fun. It's fun to do the 4 drafts and test your luck, test your mettle against the best drafters at the best time when everyone's playing their best. And it's fun to play in the top 64 when the competition is even fiercer. And of course, you get those goosebumps, you get the competition jitters, and it's great.
Yeah, I really hope that I don't get air supported out of the game again. That was not fun.
It's not in the format.
Good.
Good news.
Nothing can stop me now. Yeah, I was the 6th seed in the last draft open. I did very well on day 1. Not so well on day 2. My deck was not good. Anyway, we both need to spike it, so might be me versus Stormblessed in the finals. No concessions. And yeah, it should be a really fun time. Finally, let's take a look at the final week of the Friends of Eternal Team League. That is going to, well, at least the regular season of that is going to be wrapping up along with the end of the Open Series for this year. Right now, the rankings are Team BC in first place with Stormblast at the helm with 73 points and a record of 6-1-1. With 75 points, just edging them out is Team Rankstar at 6-2 and Team Snowford, or the Snowford, I guess. Is it team or the, or is it just like not specified? So
It's kind of unspecified, but it's
Yeah.
also kind of the.
Okay, is at 6-2 with 48 points. So those three teams are locked for the playoffs. However, the seeding is still up for grabs, and that's really important because the playoff format is very punishing and unforgiving, and it's a step ladder format where if you have a better record than the opponent had in the regular season, then you get a bye. So all those teams are going to be playing for something. And finally, for the fourth spot in the playoffs, we have 5 teams still in contention. We have Team Invoke Lethal, the Misplay Teal Trapezoids, CSB, Friends of Eternal, and Team Eternal Journey. I think Friends of Eternal is basically out of this because we only have 31 points, and there's going to be some tiebreaker that goes into this. And I looked at the pairings, and I just got the impression that it was going to be impossible for Friends of Eternal to make the playoffs. So we're going to see what happens with the last week. TBC versus the Misplay Teal Trapezoids, Team Rank Star versus Eternal Titans, the Snowfort versus Friends of Eternal, Team Invoke Lethal versus We Streamed Games Ones, and CSB versus Team Eternal Journey all have playoff implications. So it should be a lot of fun. In addition to having a fun tournament, we'll have some score watching and tallying to keep track of.
It's very cool that we have sort of 2 big stories to follow for Team League, which is a lot. Even into the last day, we still have 2 big stories, and the big stories are, who's going to get the most number of points, TBC versus Rank Star, 73 versus 75. It's very close there, up for grabs for anyone to get who gets the most points. And then, of course, we have sort of 5 teams in contention for top 4. Although somebody said FE might already be out, but it's possible if you spike it, if other members Joel Therese gets like top 4, whatever, you can get a bunch of points then and spike it out. Of course, Team Invoke Lethal could just win it and then make the whole competition moot. But we'll all see, right? That's the fun part, is to find out what's going to happen.
Yeah, and the points total mattering not just for seeding, but also because there's a, what did I say, $300 prize attached to it? I'm pretty sure it's $300. Yeah. So we'll see if TBC can overtake TRS or if TRS is just going to waltz away with it. All right, that pretty much wraps it up for stuff that we were going to talk about on this podcast. Thanks for listening, and a huge thank you to our patrons who continue to support us. Shout out to Telmokos, Odzos, Pruibin, Workdone Chrissier, D-Dub, and Yeastout for their continued support of FECast. If you would like to support the cast, you can go to patreon.com/Friends of Eternal. I think this is going to be the last cast until the tournament, so good luck everyone out there. You can probably find me late at night playing drafts in the Friends of Eternal voice channels, so keep an eye out for that if that interests you. Thanks to everyone for watching again, or for listening again, and until next time, we will see you in the Friend Zone. The Friends of Eternal Discord is the best place on the internet to get better at Eternal. We have players of all skill and experience levels, all happy to help each other out on basically any aspect of their Eternal gameplay. And making all this possible is our generous patrons over at patreon.com. If you'd like to support FECast or Friends of Eternal, consider donating at patreon.com/Friends of Eternal. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, we'll see you in the Friend Zone.